Welcome everyone to our webinar on sustainability and change in after-school systems, 2013 to 2020. As you come into the webinar, I see you're dropping your name and organization and location into the chat. Thank you, and let's keep those coming. We're up to about 86, 87 people, and we hope to have many more as the hour progresses. I'm Priscilla Little, a senior consultant at the Forum for Youth Investment, and I will be the moderator for today's session. The session is being co-hosted by Every Hour Counts, and Jessica Donner helped frame our time together, and she'll come on screen in just a minute. The goals of today's webinar are to briefly ground you in the main findings of a hot off the presses report on sustainability and change in after-school systems over the past 7 years, and then hear from 4 after-school system leaders about their different approaches to system building and ask them to reflect on some of the key findings in the report. So let me tackle our first goal, which is to briefly review why the Wallace Foundation commissioned FHI 360 to conduct their second large-scale survey of after-school systems and what we learned 7 years after the first survey. Over the past 2 decades, the after-school field has seen the emergence of many out-of-school time or after-school systems and networks, and we have learned a lot about how they work and how a community can go about building one. But what we know less about is how cities can and are sustaining their efforts to coordinate. Stability and Change in After-School Systems, 2013 to 2020, is a follow-up of a 2012 study, which found that 77 of 100 large United States cities were coordinating the work of out-of-school time providers, government agencies, private funders, and others to provide high-quality after-school programs to children who stand to benefit the most. The new report focuses on 3 components described in the research on after-school coordination: a designated coordinating entity, a common data system, and a framework or set of standards for program quality. These are the same 3 components that the researchers interrogated in 2012. The authors were able to gather information about the status of after-school systems in 67 of the 75 cities that were surveyed in 2012. 2 of the original 77 cities were left out of the study for methodological reasons. And let me say welcome to those of you who are just coming in. We're just starting our webinar on sustainability and change in after-school systems, and keep your introductions in the chat going. The report has 5 main findings, and you can find a link to the infographic of those findings in the chat right now. Ian just put it in. A big headline is that after-school coordination is continuing. More than 3/4 of the cities with after-school coordination in 2013 were still coordinating after-school efforts in 2020. Moreover, the proportion of cities that had adopted all 3 components of after-school systems, a designated coordinating entity, a common data system, and a framework or a set of standards for program quality, increased from 29% in 2013 to 40% in 2020. So the second big headline of the report is that many cities expanded the roles and functions of their system in the past 7 years. A third finding is that while the percentage of cities with a common data system and the percentage with quality standards or a quality framework both increased, 1/4 of the cities that had coordinating entities in 2013 no longer have them in 2020. I'm interested in the chat if you want to speculate on why that might be true. The authors speculate that this may be indicative of after-school systems adapting to changes in city priorities and resources, or adapting to new forms of governance. Statewide and regional networks, state-level after-school coordination initiatives, and private philanthropy appear to be playing a larger role in supporting coordination in 2020 than in 2013. We also know that in some communities, after-school systems have become part of larger community collaboratives. So while the coordination continues, it might be housed in a larger community change effort. And so people wouldn't call themselves an after-school system because they're part of a larger coordination effort. The research also found a statistically significant relationship between increased funding for after-school coordination and the use of quality standards or a quality framework, as well as a statistically significant relationship between having a high or moderate level of support from the mayor or county executives and having a common data system. This finding was also seen in 2013 and speaks to the critical role that city government plays in systems sustainability. When asked what they needed to strengthen their systems building efforts, only 30% reported wanting help with strengthening financial management. Instead, respondents in a majority of the cities expressed a desire for more resources and support in a number of areas, including effective communication with partners and the public, using data for continuous improvement and planning, and helping program providers to collect, report, and work with data. This finding represents the understanding that strength and sustainability require more than getting dollars in the door. The authors also looked at 50 cities where in 2013, there was no after-school coordination or where they were unable to find a knowledgeable contact about after-school coordination. Of the 34 cities where a knowledgeable contact could be found in 2020, 14 were now doing some coordination. So again, there's been an uptick on the coordination. So that's a brief overview of the findings, which I hope you will continue to have on your screen on a little window so you can refer to them during our session this morning. I wanted to do this to ground the conversation, what we'll now have our panelists discuss. And the meat of this webinar is really to hear from people in the field doing this work. So Jessica Donner, I'm going to invite you to join us, and Chris and Suzette and Fahren and Nathan. So Jess and I invited 4 communities to really bring the findings from this report to life. Chris Smith is president and executive director of the Boston Afterschool and Beyond, which is celebrating its 12th anniversary this year. Suzette Harvey is CEO and executive director of Primetime in Palm Beach County, about to enter its 3rd decade of being an after-school system. Shout out to Suzanne in Palm Beach County. Chris and Suzette are the early adopters of taking a systems approach and help develop the proof of principle that system building can improve access to quality after-school and summer learning experiences. To bookend these communities, we also have Nathan Beck, coordinator of the Madison Out of School Time in Madison, Wisconsin, which formally launched just 5 years ago. And Fahren Johnson, director of strategic initiatives at Green Trike Expanded Learning Opportunities, is from Tacoma, Washington, where she incubated the city's after-school system at the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, and just last week formally launched the system at Green Trike, an education and advocacy organization that grew out of the Tacoma Children's Museum. So we have everything from a 30-year-old veteran to, I can't call Fahren a new kid on the block because she's been doing this a long time, but she's new in her role as executive director of the launched intermediary. And certainly, last but not least, is the co-host of this webinar, Jessica Donner, who is both a wonderful work colleague and a personal friend, and she's executive director of the Every Hour Counts. And she's going to actually close out our panel with some reflections on the after-school systems building movement over the years. So to get us started, I wanted to ground our discussion in the reality of today, the 1-year anniversary of the World Health Organization declaring COVID-19 a global pandemic. And I want to ask each panelist the same question. The report provides a look at the state of after-school coordination just prior to the unexpected and devastating closure of schools and after-school programs in the spring of 2020. It goes on to acknowledge the important role that after-school programs have played during the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and structural racism. It also posits that communities with after-school systems might be in a better position to weather tough times and disruptions such as these. I know all of you agree with that last statement because we had our prep call and you said you did. But what I'd like to hear from you is, what is the specific value add right now of your system as youth, families, providers, and schools have experienced disruption on so many levels? And as you respond to this, please tell us a little bit about how your system operates and is responding to challenges now. Suzette, I'm going to ask you to start.
Well, good afternoon. So thank you for having me. As you said, we've been at this for a couple of decades now, and being an established intermediary organization, I think we responded very well to the pandemic. We have a trusted partner in our funder. So we have been funded through the Children's Services Council of Palm Beach County for our entire 20-year history. And when all of this happened, they turned to us as a trusted leader in the out of school time field to be able to reach out to our practitioners and the programs to see how people are doing and to figure out what support can look like immediately. First thing we did is we created a website, a web page on our website to put resources in real time to be able to support our programs. We listed who was working, who wasn't working, where we can find resources. We also had to change our method of delivery. We've been around for a long time. We've started to grow. We're 34 strong. We have the privilege of having a lot of hands-on, high-touch work. And now all the programs are closed. What do? We immediately changed our quality improvement to do one-on-one virtual coaching. We were able to incentivize self-assessment, as we're doing now, instead of having external assessors, to be able to have programs continue to focus on quality because we knew it was so important. I have 23 subcontracts where they're getting, a few millions of dollars. We wanted to make sure we were able to keep them whole because we're providing services, in program. We gave them a little space so that they'd be able to create virtual programming while still being able for us to be able to cover staff costs. And that was through our funder. We created a one-time grant program for programs who are starting to do virtual learning. They applied a very short application, got $1,000 checks into people's hands almost immediately. We incentivized our PD, our training, so that out-of-work practitioners will still have a little bit of money and they can still keep their skills up while they're closed. One of our primary partners was a school district who have after-school programs that are run by the district, and all of those were shut down. And we had a very qualified, competent group of people who we want to make sure came back into the fold, so we were able to provide them incentives. And then when programs started to come back, we continued to incentivize those who were working because they needed to have support as well. In terms of summer camp enhancements, this is what we are really known for, our hands-on activities. We turned that into a summer camp schedule. We offered over 200 hands-on activities for families. We offered them, some of them were live, and we had almost 13,000 people come to our site to take part in some of these activities. And we also are responding to, the racial injustice that was happening. Immediately on January 14th, we held an open forum for our practitioners to talk about, the Capitol insurgency. And we've created a 9-hour, 3-part diversion, inclusion, diversity, and equity training that is going on right now. So I think we will be able to be responsive right away, to be making sure that we keep all of our practitioners as well as we can in the fold and providing them with information and support.
Thank you so much, Suzette. And I just wrote in the chat, for those of you who are listening in, we'd love to hear your strategies for how you're supporting youth, families, and providers during this time of disruption. And while you're typing those in, Nathan, I'm going to ask you to chime in on this conversation.
Yeah, hi everybody. And first, I just want to say how honored to share space with folks like this, particularly Jessica Donner, who has been just an unbelievable champion, and Priscilla, who every time I have tracked down at a conference and asked a question, I have walked away with a nugget that really impacted our work. We're an intermediary in Madison, Wisconsin, and we really started kind of early stages in about 2012, but we took a good 4 to 5 years to develop before our work really started to feel real. We're a joint initiative between the city of Madison and our local school district, and we have a steering board of the folks who actually do the work. So we really see ourselves accountable to those 3 pillars. And I actually might start on the value of the intermediary in a slightly different place, because I actually think we did not have a very good value proposition for the first several years. We weren't really providing value. I think we were just in this developmental stage. A colleague of mine calls us toddlers in the work. And I think it's really accurate, because developmentally, we spent the first several years just making connections, building relationships, and really trying to find our place in the world, right? And then it seems like overnight, we became toddlers, where all that development crystallized into action, and we were running. We stumbled, right? We still stumble, but we're running, and it feels really good. To put the value now in context, I think we have to talk about the pandemic response. So starting in March last year, we were able to coordinate and arrange really quickly. We had public health the school district providers and the city in weekly meetings where we were able to respond to new needs. Quickly, I'll give a couple examples. Our schools were closed on a Sunday afternoon around 1 o'clock. The announcement came. By the end of the day Sunday, we already had over a dozen neighborhood centers and other organizations ready to deliver school district meals directly to students' homes. Over the course of the spring, they delivered over 50,000 meals directly to students' homes, right, which was a barrier. We then developed guidance with public health to open summer programs in a safe way for essential workers. And then in the fall, we used that model to expand to community learning hubs to support learning in person because our schools have been closed actually until Tuesday. Kindergartners just returned in Tuesday, so we're doing that now, but we've been closed up until then. And I think when we were doing the work to set up in-person learning, community learning hubs, we recognized that with schools closed, there were actually tons of underutilized resources. So the district offered all 32 elementary school buildings as sites, busing and school transportation, food service and food service staff, nurses on site, and then quite a bit more. We were able to advocate to the governor's office with the mayor and the superintendent for gear funds. We got about $1.5 million from the gear funds to support this project. And then between the city and the school district, we were able to find about $500,000 new dollars, so new dollars that we called stabilization funds to ensure that providers were serving low-income students. So through this body of work, about 5,000 students received collectively 640,000 hours of support since September. It's about 130 hours per kid. They're disproportionately students of color, disproportionately students who qualify for free or reduced lunch. And obviously, we have a lot of players involved in this. This is not a singular responsibility of the intermediary. But we really, our intermediary provided the infrastructure and the expectation of coordination and a lot of the labor. And so, we really couldn't have imagined this without the intermediary.
Thank you, Nathan. And so we've heard from the Southeast and the Midwest. Now we're going to head to the Pacific Northwest. Fahren, can you chime in on this conversation?
Absolutely. And to echo everyone, honored to be in the space. We're a new baby as an OSTI, but we're definitely not new to the work. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit also around the importance of the intermediary, because it is important to create that pathway to how we were able to respond the way we did when we had to pivot in March. And so one of the elements about Tacoma is that we will get into the space, roll our sleeves up and get the work done. And so the ELO space, expanded learning, OSTI space, capacity building through quality work, those were already existing in the Tacoma ecosystem for over a decade, but it was just a bit disconnected, a little bit disjointed, wasn't a whole lot of alignment and awareness to who was doing what in the space. So we're part of the Priscilla 6, I say, and that's the Partnership for Social Emotional Learning. And being a part of that work highly brought visible the need for a coordinating entity that would do the following: foster alignment in initiative work, raise awareness, resources, advocacy of the value of the ELO OST space, build capacity of ELO providers and programs to ensure high quality resonates in the space, ensuring students and families have equitable and easy access to connect to the ELO opportunities, and enabling conditions for grassroots, CBOs, NPOs, and other sectors to partner and collaborate, understanding who's doing what to support our most vulnerable students and families. And so when March hit, we were right in the middle of a Priscilla research, and the OSTI being incubated by a funder was a plus for us, because one of the really lessons learned around how we fund communities when it comes to crisis is being able to open up some of that funding to flex. And so being a part of the GTF space, they were able to quickly allow our providers who came into the Priscilla space with a very specific type of work that we were doing around connecting SEL in and out of school time, but to be able to flex that so that they can come in and partner with schools when they had to close. And so part of the role that we played was holding center along with Green Track, who I am now the Director of Strategic Initiatives with, is we stood up emergency day camps. And we let our providers know who were in the Priscilla system, you can flex your funds however you need, whether it's staff up, whether it's get materials, whether it's figuring out what other resources that you need to bring into the play to be able to get into those after school spaces, please do that. We will make sure we help you connect to the spaces that need ELO. Would love to bring something different to the space other than just what it looked like childcare or day camp or however we wanted to, categorize that. And so the funding piece was very, very critical. We did not want to lose our ELO providers because already they have to rub 2 nickels together to make $2 to try to figure out how to bring quality program to come into the space. So we did not want funding to be a barrier. So that was one area that we responded. The other is we quickly, after standing up those emergency day camps, we pivoted into the ELO online space. And we made sure that our providers, our ELO providers that were in the space were adequately equipped, had what they need. Obviously, those who are in the space with me know tech access, quality internet, broadband, that's an issue, in our under-resourced communities. But we wanted to make sure first that our providers were ready to lift into a remote learning space, and then be able to make sure that the students that loved their ELO family, they were disconnected from them for a minute, and to be able to reconnect them in the online space was just absolutely critical so that we would not lose our young people and where they disengage. It's easier to keep them engaged, not worry so much about attending ELO program than it is when you absolutely lose a student. It's really hard to do that. So we very quickly had to build that ELO online system to be able to continue the work of an initiative, but also kind of meet the needs of families who are wanting to plug their students into additional spaces. And then lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about how we engage community. So we do have a collective impact team that is within the Tacoma space. And we really wanted to make sure that our young Brown and Black youth that did not have now a direct link into plugging into spaces, they're going to be out in community. We don't want community calling the police on our Brown and Black students. So how do we help bring and breathe in our community, safe community? How do we talk about that? How do we talk about children at the center of community, youth at the center of community? So if they're going to the grocery store, if they're at the coffee shop, if they're at the park, how do we equip the adults in the space to be able to make sure that that is a warm and safe place, and young people know that they belong there, they can come there, they can be themselves in the space. So it was bringing up some areas with even our grocery workers. If someone comes into your space, say hello, say how are you doing, provide a warm welcome. We're trying to also infuse SEL into the space, not just within the school space, but in the out of school time space and beyond. So we really, being a part of the Priscilla work, help prime us to be able to now share some of those strategies, some of those what we call Castle 5 competencies of being socially aware. We were really able to now share those strategies out with our community so that as our young people are out in the space and out being who they are, they know that there is a space that they're welcome to be in and that they belong in. So we, responding to the COVID space, Priscilla really helped put us in a good position to be able to do that and to pivot quickly in the midst of crisis. But the funding piece was very critical. We didn't want to see our ELO providers fall under or lose, detached from young people. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Fahren. And now heading back to Boston, which is my hometown, let's hear from Chris Smith about what Boston After School and Beyond has been doing.
Thanks, Priscilla, and thanks to the forum and Every Hour Counts for hosting today's session. As intermediaries, you might share the sense that we exist on a spectrum between necessary to have and nice to have, and that may vary depending on your audience. The pandemic made us more necessary than ever to more stakeholders than ever. And I won't repeat all the ways that happened. I think Suzette, Nathan, and Fahren did a great job of that. I'll say that the role that we played more than usual was that of fundraiser for the community. And we did so by, in a way, approaching the conditions. I think back to this time last year, it was March 13th, it was a Friday. The mayor and superintendent just had a press conference to close schools. And Superintendent Caselius called that night and said, okay, what kind of activities can we organize for kids? And then I mean, it's funny to think. We thought, well, we'll surely be back in school. Will it be May or June? We'll definitely be back. But that period of fear and uncertainty, March through June, gave way to activity. And so in the summertime, the school district decided to restrict its funds to virtual programs only. And we have a 10-year project to use the entire city as a classroom, to get kids out and about all across the city. They weren't ready to do that given the public health conditions. So we had to raise money for those programs who were confident that they could offer safe in-person programs, taking advantage of the weather and the outdoors. So we raised a small amount of money for 45 programs to model what it would mean to get back together. And at the time, I'll never forget the visual of seeing kids doing an opening ritual where, you know, it looked similar, but not this time they spread out their arms. So they had 6 feet and had masks, and just how quickly everyone adjusted to that. That was important because then the rest of our network could learn from those who took the first step. And really, that was some of the first in-person activity in all of society, not just education. And we took a bit of a risk at that point in the transition between the summer and the school year. And we asked our entire network, what would you need for funding in order to adjust for this moment? And meanwhile, we did not have a single dollar raised, but we thought, let's assess the need and see if there's interest. And we came back with, you know, we didn't meet all of the demand, but funders really stepped up in a huge way. I mean, weekly meetings, we've had more conversation with funders in the last 6 months than we have in 10 years. It's been wonderful. And they really put together the funds necessary to stand up pods. We have 16 organizations who organized 150 in-person full-day pods. In other words, school for kids who couldn't be left home alone, mostly K-6. And that was about a $2 million effort. And that's a big deal for us. That's half our budget. That was an addition. We also played the role of convener in a way that we hadn't. And we used to, pre-pandemic, spend a lot of money on lunch, and you'd really manage that RSVP list to see who's coming. And of course, the weather in Boston would always get in the way, so you'd lose people. But we have weekly noon Zooms on Thursdays at noon, and it's a great way to share information. It's a bit of a marketplace. We solve problems where we can. We can get the time of key leaders like the superintendent and others to address the group. So that's been great. And then finally, our usual practices of data collection, analysis, and professional development, we adjusted to meet the moment in terms of the racial injustice that people are more aware of now, and in terms of serving young people virtually, and to focus more intensively on their mental health, social, and emotional needs. So we've been able to draw on all the good work we've learned through the PACELI, or Partnerships for Social and Emotional Learning Initiative, with our 5 city partners in the Wallace Foundation. But I'll leave you with this. You know, we felt fortunate that we had spent so much time cultivating a broad and diverse network, and that we were data driven, because I think the fact that we were able to pull people together, a call this size every week, knowing that everyone is measuring the same things at the program level and the student level, lent the network credibility so that private funders initially could step in and feel like they were making a good investment. And hopefully, now that we have new stimulus, even more stimulus, we can make another transition. Now that we know we're necessary, and that's known to more stakeholders, we don't want to miss this moment to make sure that our network can be put to its highest and best use, to make the entire city a classroom, and to make that an expectation for young people, not just nice to have pre-pandemic and necessary to have during it, but an expectation of a public education. Because what was evident to everyone this year, that mental health, social and emotional skills they're not in addition to learning, they're prerequisites to learning. I think everyone knows that, whether in the city or the burbs, an urban area or a rural area, we have to make sure that's part of the package we deliver. And so, you know, we feel reasonably optimistic that having been so resourceful and creative that the programs in our network are ready to play an even more meaningful and strategic role going forward.
Thank you so much. And I hope that these 4 responses have given other communities inspiration on some things they can do now and moving forward to support young people taking a more coordinated approach to after-school system building. I do want to spend some time exploring the findings in the report. And Chris, actually, you just teed up the question for you, which is around the report highlights 3 components foundational to system building: coordination, clearly Boston After School and Beyond is coordinated, quality standards, and you're actually really known for your data work. Can you talk about how those components have evolved at Boston After School and Beyond, and how that progress is related to your overall sustainability?
Yeah, thanks, Priscilla. I think the data work speaks for itself. And I'll just tell you a quick story. 10 years ago, we launched our model of summer learning, which was a transition from the old summer school that frankly nobody paid much attention to and was overfunded and underattended, to a much more enriching summer learning model where young people didn't have to choose between academic remediation and enrichment. It could be one and the same, part and parcel of the same thing. And in the early going, we had a great diverse set of partners to model this. And private funders said, well, how do you know that works? You have 5 very different programs. One's sports, one's arts, one's leadership, one's employment. And our work in measurement, it was necessary in order to convey something across different programs. So, you know, we're fortunate, well, no more fortunate than anyone else on this call, but, you know, NIOST, the National Institute of Out of School Time, is just a short drive away. And they developed just like the Weichert Center and the Forum, a companion set of tools at the program and student level that are actually required. If you're lucky enough to get public funding for out of school time in the state or at the city, you have to use them anyway. So we started using those tools, and we faced a decision point, Priscilla, where the summer model was taking off, but we didn't have enough money to scale the model at the time. So we said, well, what if we scaled the measurement aspect of this? So since then, back in 2013, we said to all the programs in Boston, you're welcome to use these tools with us. If you do, you'll get good information that's actionable for your own program. And because we have a growing network, you'll be able to benchmark yourself against others in the network. And what that will enable you to do is learn from others where you need to improve and share what you do particularly well. So we've just iterated on that cycle after cycle, year after year. I won't bring you through all the changes, but we're trying to be responsive so that the data are actionable. I mean, I've never heard a person say, this isn't relevant to my program. And it's specific enough where you can have a conversation with your staff and get better. And taking together, it's reliable enough to be meaningful to funders. And we're to the point now, Priscilla, where the Boston Public Schools and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, in their summer learning, and even some other line items, they name the skills that we measure with our network. So they become things that you don't just do on the side, but it counts for your accountability. So I think we've met in the middle on improvement in accountability. It's not something I would have predicted or planned. We backed into it. And that's been how our network has grown from just a handful of programs 10 years ago to 350 now.
Well, thank you. A very powerful story around data. And now I want to turn to Suzette. Primetime is known for its deep commitment to program quality and professional development. And in the report, over 50% of the respondents in the survey indicated a desire for resources and external supports to strengthen quality standards. What advice do you have for systems that are trying to strengthen their quality improvement? And why is it so important to do that?
So I'm going to almost start backwards, just thinking about what Chris just said about the importance of data. We're in this 20 years. We started our quality work probably about 2004. It's when we started working with the Weichert Center on our standards. And we had a 10-year report that came out, I think now it's 2 years ago, looking at 10 years of quality data. And we're now at the point where programs coming into our quality improvement system are at a much higher level of quality. The baseline is high. It's not good for our researchers, but it's great for our community. So how did we get there? It took us a long time. And I think, we almost look at a playbook on how do you do quality. We started with a champion, and that happens to be the funders and a few, stakeholders in the community. And they had the vision to know this is a really long game. You can't do quality improvement in 1 year or 2 years. It takes commitment and it takes time to do. So anyone who's going into this work knowing that it's really going to take time. You have to build the trust. I will be a broken record about relationship building. It is what I referred to earlier in my conversations about being able to respond to the pandemic. It's because we have built the trust in the community with our funders, our partners, and the programs with whom we serve. So we know that it takes time, it takes trust, it takes champions. So we started very, very small. We first had groups of stakeholders. All of those people I just talked to were at the table to look at possible standards. We looked at what was available, and that's back in 2006, 2007. Now we have so much resources. Anyone starting out can just, look at the Wallace Foundation website. There is so much rich content. Every Hour Counts has it. The information is there. But then you have to bring in the community voice. We spent a long time, I think it was well over 1.5 years at that time. I wasn't at prime time, but I happened to still be part of the work as a funder. And we looked and we met and we discussed and we debated till we came up with a set of standards that were right for our community. As you can see, as we all talked about our response to the pandemic, one size doesn't fit all. The work of the coordinating organization is very local. It's very much to what the needs are for your community. If there's anything that I would have done differently back then, it was to include more youth voice. Yes, we heard from parents, we heard from providers, but I think we could have done that a little better. We heard from 200 programs, over 1,800 individuals and families. So we got that in, and we made it low stakes, and that was very important for our work with the Weichert Center at that point. Meet programs where we are. We all have said this, but honestly and truly do that. Don't, do to, do with. All of these are, mantras that are part of the work that we do. And really to be that sounding board and that confidant to those programs that are just approaching this work. What does it mean to have quality programming? Provide the PD that is going to help meet those standards and model it. Give people the space to play, to try things on before they're with their youth in the program. And we do a lot of that at prime time, pre-pandemic, a lot of, have fun with it, make mistakes, allow people to make mistakes, and know that eventually the data will come. We were very privileged to have the Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago do a process evaluation on our work. I think it was 5 or 6 years. And we used that data each time they came back and said, you need to make these changes to strengthen the program. We listened. So the whole idea of what we talk to programs about, to be able to, act and do, and then you go back and you look at it again and you make changes, we did that. And that strengthened the program. So even if you hear things that you don't want, or you thought it would come out one way, be willing to change. And to use the data, not only with your funders, but to go back and have those honest conversations with the people with whom you're collecting all this data on. You have to go back, because that's really important. If you collect it, they want to know how they can use it to better their programs. And lastly, I think it's another strong point of just for my community, is to recognize achievement of our practitioners as often as we can. We all know this is very hard work and also is often not recognized work, but we here on this call and in our communities know how important that work is for our young people. So when you can, whether it's fiscal, whether it's just saying, thank you for what you're doing, recognize the work, and just hold up our work as intermediaries, as supporting organizations to champion our practitioners.
Thank you so much, Suzette. And I see a couple of questions coming in the chat around how to use new stimulus money and also how to really support providers right now. We're not actually going to have a lot of time for panelists to respond to questions verbally, but I encourage panelists to check the chat, type in some responses, and really anyone on the call, may have insights into those questions. So please feel free to support your colleagues in the questions they're asking. And now, Nathan, I'm going to ask you a question. You began a journey to build an after-school system in Madison with a real champion, Mayor Soglin, who I know when I was at the Wallace Foundation, I took more than one call from him. He was a real dedicated supporter of the work. So the survey findings say that in 2013 and again in 2021 points to the importance of mayoral support, particularly as it relates to having a common data system. How do you get and sustain that critical leadership in the city? And what data do you need to make the case to city government that after school is a worthwhile and after school systems are a worthwhile investment?
Well, so first a shout out. So I think the first data that Mayor Soglin was really interested in was actually Boston. He was very enamored by that model. So Chris, thank you for your work, really helping set a foundation and give a vision of what a system can do, because it really inspired our mayor. And you know, our intermediary, I think, like a lot, started grappling with this question of who has access to out of school time. It was an access question, and more importantly, who doesn't and why not? And those are the questions that drove our development. And at the beginning, you know, when we were asking those questions, we didn't have any common data system, so we genuinely didn't have an idea. You know, I hear stories of Paul Soglin, who was our former mayor until about 2 years ago. Fascinating character, basically mayor for life, on and off again since the 1970s. He was an active Vietnam War resistor who was arrested, got into politics, and then was basically mayor for life. Had a large and pristine mustache. Very interesting person. And I hear stories of him saying, you know, 3 weeks after having started the initiative, is how he would have envisioned it. Saying, okay, I started this initiative. How many more kids have access to out of school time? And that was a question that I think he always came back to. And it's a very policymaker kind of question that I actually want to come back to if we have a chance at the end. But at the time, we didn't have any way of answering it, right? We didn't have a common data system. But what we could do is we could survey folks. We could talk to parents, we could talk to students, we could talk to providers. We could start to understand the actual landscape. Is access a problem? Why is it a problem? And who is it a problem for? So for folks that don't have a common data system yet, I don't think you need to pause on the data work. It just might look different, right? I think a first step is to understand the problem and landscape. And once you're able to really clearly articulate that, it's a problem that policymakers actually want to solve. But I also want to speak more specifically on that question of what data do you need to have to make the case that city investments in after school systems are worthwhile? Because I think what makes the case that investments are worthwhile is having providers believe in you and the value that you add. I think that is what will ensure long-term stability beyond a single mayor. And so I think the common data systems work is easy to frame and think about in relation to policymakers and leaders. And I think those are often the folks that are driving that work. But I think that work must be for providers first and policymakers second, right? At least in our local context. And I'll tell a little story about kind of our story here. It's 3.5 years ago is about when I started. And a couple months later, we brought Gail Snyder to the team who leads our data systems work. At the time, we had paid city spans a decent amount of money to build something. We didn't know what it was. We did not have a legal framework to share any data. And nobody wanted to use it, right? That was 3.5 years ago. So fast forward 3.5 years now, we're sharing real-time personally identifiable data of 10,000 students with 90 different programs. We're using it now actively to contract trace from school pods as they return to school to after school pods. We're renewing our data sharing agreement right now to more seamlessly share more student data at a really specific level. At the high school level, things like student schedule and missing assignments, which are things that providers have been asking for. And we've gotten here really with a no stakes process. We in Madison have a value and approach that we don't do sticks. And I think you've heard this from a lot of folks about really building trust. We're not about compliance. We want to build something that is worthwhile, that people want to participate in, right? That's our approach. And I think we've done this first by focusing on how to make the data work useful for a provider, how to meet a need that they have. Right, this work must make their lives easier. And we believe that that approach, focusing first on what providers need and want, will lead to the rest. It will lead to the common system that answers questions that policymakers have. But we've taken this approach where the providers really drive the development and the direction, because I think it has to be useful for them. And I think it's an approach that, again, and you've heard this from a lot of folks, that drives buy-in to the process. It builds stakeholder trust. And it also, I think, embeds your work in the functioning of other organizations. Right now, I think, 90 programs rely on us. The district relies on us. Multiple funders rely on our data work. I mean, that's what gives me confidence and stability, right? Not that a single mayor likes us, although that's important, especially initially, but that we're actually embedded into how other organizations function. And so we disappear, and all of a sudden, something that dozens of organizations are relying on disappears too.
Thank you so much, Nathan. And Fahren, the Tacoma Community Foundation incubated the after-school system in Tacoma as part of an initiative aimed at improving partnerships between after-school providers and the school day personnel, and that's what you referred to as PACELI. How do you think the expectations of district partnership from the outset shaped the three main components of the system: coordination, data, and quality?
I mean, let me just start off again. Here's the Tacoma headline. We launched an OSTI in the middle of a health and race crisis, y'all. And I'm so glad we did not let fear stop us from doing that, because we will see change in some of our systems when it comes to supporting children, youth, families through OST and racism. And it's just getting into the work and doing it. And we've been a very, very strong partner with Tacoma Public Schools. So again, I referred earlier that the OSTI is new, but the work in ELO is not. And so this is 10 to 12 years of establishing strong partnership, strong trust within the school district. When it comes to the coordination piece of a coordination entity, when we first incubated work within GTCF, is a funder, which is a very different culture than direct service. The training ground, the lessons learned about the philanthropic culture and how it shows up and partners with schools and partners with community, it really sharpened us and challenged us all around how we flex, how we build systems with partners like our school district, how we reform policies and practices that help to close gaps. And in this case, we were working off the data that says, if our community partners or a young person is connected to a caring adult, they may not be directly plugged into an academic program, but they're plugged into arts, they're plugged into dance, they're plugged into theater. We see a change and impact in their academic success. And so we really built a strong sense of, first, when we partner with our school districts, when it comes to like coordination, which is a very, very important piece of the work, because you cannot really have a strong ELO program if you don't have quality coordination that comes with it. We found that in partnership with the school district, they're very busy. Their teachers are stretched, from one end to the other. There's a lot going on. The principals have a lot that they have to do. So the coordination piece was already something that was existing in our Tacoma ecosystem, and having a liaison in the building is very important, because that person helps to establish the climate and culture in a space, helps to make sure that policy when it comes to school district spaces and what you can do in a school district space, but still holding true to the feel and flow and fun of what ELO can bring into a out of school time space. So the coordination piece, very, very, very important. When it comes to the data system piece, that's the area where we definitely need to do better when it comes to that. We really, not having a coordinating entity in the space, we really could not pinpoint like who was synthesizing data, who was mining it, who was extracting it, but pushing it back out. I think it was to Suzette's point, talking about you gotta get that data back to providers, back to families, back to our school staff, so that we can sit together and talk about where are the gaps. Too many times, and this is something that I learned early in the beginning of this work, is the data it feels punitive to a lot of people. So we have to change and reimagine how we talk about data. So it pulls people in. It pulls people to not say, hey, we decreased in this, or we're not doing this, but to say, oh, where are gaps? Where are we missing? What areas, when it comes to our K through 5th grade space, are we not listening to? Are we missing? How do we look at data to say, oh, we might need to repivot some of our resources to help fill a gap here, or we might need to partner with different agencies when it comes to this. So the data piece has been something that we're really, really trying to ensure is equitable across the space. One area where I feel like we do very well in partnership with school district is aligning when it comes to school demographics, right? We will ask for data around free and reduced lunch. We will ask for data around, what students have special needs, who are ELL. But the area, when I feel, when I talk about what data is, I really feel like our providers, our ELO providers, they should own their own data. We have aligning systems that we absolutely can do. But if a one world aligned system for some reason goes down, then our providers lose access to that data. And that is the area where we need to learn how to flex. We don't have to align to everything, but we can agree on what are we collecting. And so those are the areas that we work very strongly with our partners around. What type of demographic data do we need, do we not need? What type of academic data do we need? There's SBAC, there's iReady. How do we use some of that data to correlate with what's going on in the out of school time space to really truly say, hey, we're making a difference as an OST. There's great gains happening to our young people. How do we continue to build off of that? I'm reminded around data that has been around for a long time, and we got a lot of youth professionals in the space. And so when it comes to third grade reading level, right, and how that affects our brown and black community, brown and black boys, setting them up potentially to be right in that pipeline to prison pathway. That is data that has not changed for the last 20 years. I looked it up. We have not put a dent into that data yet, but we're collecting data around that. And so in my mind, when I say that's a data, it has not moved. We have not been able to move that lever. It makes me think about how do we use data to position ourselves with our school district partners with funding and braided resources. So if we have literacy organizations who have this really cool way of connecting and getting young people to love to read, particularly in our BIPOC communities, how do we make sure that they have the resources, the funding to stay consistent in that space? Something is happening in that data that we're not able to move it. So I'm a proponent of not just extracting data, but how we take the data, work together with our school partners and our out of school time partners and say, we're gonna priority focus because this is a huge gap right here. And we need to figure out where we can align in this space to be able to address that. So that is, some of the areas, when it comes to data, how we work with our school district partners. They also have what they call a family app where parents can go into a space. They don't have to bounce around all over the place trying to figure out how to get information, which correlates to what they call a partner portal, where partners who are in partnership with the district providing ELO in the space can get into that space and get the data and extract the data that they need at their own will. Still working that out, still in the stages of piloting that. But those are areas where the alignment, we don't have to lose all of our ability to be able to access our own data, but being able to align to say, how does this data and this data align from this in and out of school time space? How does that correlate for us to see is there really some gaps being addressed when it comes to the data? So I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about that. I also want to just jump really quickly to Suzette's point around quality, because there was something in the chat that they made an observation around how long it takes, to build quality programming, to really build those relationships. And in my mind, I see quality not costing at some point, because there should be an expectation across our whole children and youth development field, regardless if you can pay or not. Quality should just be what it is, how it shows up in the space. But it takes time to help to build our providers in that quality space, to help build what quality looks like when it comes to coordination, to help build what quality looks like when we're trying to figure out how to fund and how to get funding out to our community partners who are on the front line doing the work. So I know it's a very ambitious thinking, but I believe everyone has had a taste of what quality looks like in your own life. You have gone into a store and you've known what stellar customer service looks like, going to a space, knowing the feel and feeling very welcome, but you've also experienced what it feels like to not have that. And we don't want our young people to feel like they're walking into spaces that are disjointed like that. So how do we continue to build that? And that observation that came through the chat really kind of triggered my thinking around quality is something that does take time, but we've been able to, in our Tacoma context, been able to build a really cool cohort of providers who also know how to go out and talk with other providers who are new to the space, because quality is something that you're going to have to continue to build. We never will arrive fully to it, but we can continue to thrive and get better. But you're also going to have a continuum of providers who are coming into this work that still need to be able to fold into what are the non-negotiables when it comes to how we bring quality into our spaces. And we can't do everything. And that was the other piece that, we've talked about as a community. It's okay to be in a space and not do everything. It's okay to lean on the expertise of our community. If you're in, quality, who are those folks in your space that can bring that with fidelity, that can partner and collaborate with you in that? If it's data mining, some people really, that's not their thing, that's not their jam, but there are, organizations that it is. How are you as a coordinating entity pulling those folks together so folks know what they're doing and we can lean on the expertise of that, so that if a person leaves a position, if a superintendent leaves, a school district and moves somewhere else, we have some valued partnerships that sit in the ground space that will help us to continue to keep the work consistent. So now we are, getting our sea legs under us. I'm a part of the Green Stripe team, which is really their secret sauce is early learning. And so in my mind, it's a mission expansion to be able to come into a space that has this really, really cool child-centered community view, but also is willing to adopt all of the other things that we've been incubating in the OSTI when it comes to reaching to our school age, our middle and high school youth. We don't have to be practitioners in all of those things, but we do need to be an entity that helps coordinate and make those connections. Our school districts are a very, very, very important key to it, how we align. The Priscilla work also helped us align how SEL is infused in the space, so that it's not just in the classroom, we're saying what's up to kids. Wherever a practitioner or a provider or a teacher is in the space, they know that a warm welcome is we're speaking to our young people. We're checking in on their emotions. We're making sure we're reflecting. We've done some really, really strong partnership around that Priscilla work. And I'm excited to see how that will flex back into our early learning space, right? Which is where our, pre-K kids can really infuse some of that good SEL work, be ready to step into that space when they get into the school space and start learning. There's just an expectation on this is how we show up when we come into the space. So that quality expectation, we want to be able to keep that consistent. We bring it in through the ELO, but it also helps build climate and culture within our school school buildings and with our school district. The data, getting better with that, trying to figure out where are those spaces that we can align, but to also ensure that our providers still have access to their own data and can use it to tell their story, to position themselves for resources and all of that. And then the coordination piece is very critical too. Some say that that's a very expensive place to be, but I feel if we're able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on school curriculum, surely we can build some really cool coordinating systems that have really cool programming that can hybrid, whether you're online or in person, to be able to continue quality coordination and how that shows up in our community. And that begins to move out into how we look at partnership with our community partners, our community centers, our childcare, our daycare, our mom and pops, how we move this work out as a coordinating entity into community. We've done a lot of that piloting and vetting within the Priscilla work. So I lift up the opportunity, this because I want folks to know that was a very, very cool opportunity for us to be able to see where are the gaps? What do we need? How do we need to look at our partnerships with districts? How do we use that as a example? So when this entity gets ready to begin partnering with other school districts, we have a template that we vetted, that we piloted, and we're able to come back and present it to additional school partners to see how we can support them in their goals academically, but also how we can position their providers that are in their space to support and enrich learning as well. So I hope that answered the question, Ms. Priscilla.
Your enthusiasm,
to that
is contagious. Thank you so much. I do want to have us close out with Jessica saying a few words about reflecting on the past 10 years of after school system building growth, and you really watched this system building movement flourish. So closing remarks from Jessica.
Great. Hi, everyone. Great. It's great to be here. That was incredible. Very tough act to follow all of you, and what an honor. And just with the poignancy of today, of this being the year anniversary of the pandemic, and just feeling in such admiration for what you've all achieved over the past year, and everyone on the webinar today, and how you've helped really be saviors and lifted up your providers, met the needs of your young people's families, community partners, been amazing partners with your school districts, all to meet the needs of young people has been incredible. And I just wanted to say a few words for those less familiar with Every Hour Counts. We're a coalition of 28 after-school intermediate organizations around the country. I'm honored to have Chris, Suzette, Fahren, Nathan, all leaders in our network. And we are just completely dedicated to what this report that we've been talking about today, and we'll send you as a follow-up, is all about building and strengthening local after-school systems. We talked a lot about how quality work, coordination, data improvement systems take so much time to develop. The challenge is they can unravel almost overnight. And so we were so concerned with the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic a year ago, that all that us and leading foundations, the Wallace Foundation, the Mott Foundation, so many others, really stepped right in and provided support. Every Hour Counts. On March 17th was our first large-scale network Zoom. We were talking monthly to bring our whole community together to learn from what was first happening out in Seattle and Washington State and Tacoma, and how they were addressing the pandemic, so that folks in other parts of the country can learn from their experiences. And then the learning has just unfolded over time. But we are very fortunate that, and I think we all think it's very much due to the role of the intermediary and the strong systems that were in place, that the field has not only survived, but it's really thrived over the past year. And these and the four leaders that we all heard from today are just living proof of that, and so many more other examples around the country. One thing looking back, where have we come? How far have we come over the past 10 years? One thing to highlight: in 2006, about 15 years ago, we were a group of 6 intermediaries. We were formed by intermediaries for intermediaries to help support the field. In 2013, we were a group of 10 organizations. And now, right in January of 2020, we grew to 28 organizations, and also work with other communities and statewide networks and others all over the country. But we're just so honored to have 28 after-school organizations guiding our work. And before I share just a few insights, and I promise we'll get you on your way in about 4 more minutes, we just want to thank the Wallace Foundation for being a longstanding supporter, and for so many decades a champion and a catalyst for after-school systems. I think Wallace is very humble about the impact that they've had on the field, but I think of where we are today and how so many coordinated efforts have helped met the needs of young people, particularly Black and Brown young people in communities, is due to the thought leadership of the Wallace Foundation and their massive investments in city-based systems. As an example of that, they commissioned this report, which is full of analysis and findings that will help us also continue to pave a path forward for the field. The researchers at FHI 360, thank you for your thorough analysis, for affirming our system building movement is thriving, for raising questions for us to continue to sort of ponder and think about, and lessons learned, so how we advance the work. And a couple sort of thoughts of sort of how do we get to where we are now in this place where we are today, where we have examples like Green Trike and Fahren's leadership in Tacoma being born a week ago. I spoke with a group out in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago, where they are formally launching an OST intermediary, and this is also in the midst of a pandemic and racial reckoning, that the community is coming together to invest in this at this time. A couple things: we're here due to local innovation, first and foremost. The 4 examples, the 4 communities we heard from today are just a teaser for so many examples of how local and statewide coordinated efforts have led to watershed changes for the after-school field. But what we heard from today was so poignant about how local innovation is driving this movement. Intermediaries, whether they're local intermediaries or national intermediaries, we've been fostering cross-city and state learning support. Cities connect through Every Hour Counts, through the statewide after-school networks, through National League of Cities, the Forum for Youth Investment, and so many other efforts. And we all continue to stand here to help and support the field. Investments, certainly, I think one thing that's consistent with the 4 organizations that we've heard from today is a local investment, along consistent investment that organizations that can count on in a community, whether it's from their foundation or their city government. Also, I'm just going to name 2 OST funders. There's many, but the Wallace Foundation and the Mott Foundation have been critical in helping to build this movement and supporting place-based initiatives of research, communications to help us all advance. And then we just heard about this tremendous with the passing of the $1.9 trillion and billions of dollars flowing to states and localities. The question is how we as a field advocate and leverage those dollars to help support school and community partnerships and after school and summer learning. But the opportunity there is ripe, and we're going to be advancing that with Every Hour Counts and partnering with the After School Alliance and others to tap and to help communities tap into those resources. Couple of things, if you enjoyed the conversation today or found it valuable to your work, we are going to continue the conversation at the end of April, on April 28th to 30th. Every Hour Counts is hosting a virtual 3-day institute. If you go to our website, everyhourcounts.org, we'll put it in the chat. You can get more information and register. We'll have 3 days of deep dives with system building leaders. It's all about how to strengthen systems, led by intermediaries. We're going to be bringing youth voices into this conference, hearing from youth on panels, and also creating opportunities for youth to advise leaders in the field on how to advance the field. So please check it out and register. And just want to give a special shout out to Priscilla Little. Where we are today is also because of you. You've been leading the research, technical assistance support. Nathan, I met because of you in one piece, so thank you. But you've been just a thought leader and advisor for so many on system building. So thank you for setting the stage for this conversation and inspiring us in so many ways. Fahren, Chris, Suzette, Nathan, you were fantastic. And of course to the Wallace Foundation for funding the survey, enabling us to share today. And a special shout out to the Forum for Youth Investment for putting this on and partnering with us. And all your leadership as well in the field. Also, there was just a housekeeping thing. A lot of people, the chat was hopping. So we will share the chat with everyone in the recording and the report. And it was great to be with you all today. And we'll see you at the end of April, if not sooner.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.